For decades, a golden rule existed in global aviation. If it's not Boeing, I'm not going. The American corporation was an absolute titan, a symbol of unparalleled engineering and a byword for safety. Today, however, that mantra sounds like cruel irony. In the 2020s, the once great company has plunged into chaos, marked by accidents, endless investigations, and canceled orders, hopelessly ceding the skies to its European rival, Airbus. Passengers now anxiously check the aircraft model before purchasing a ticket. How did it come to this? How did the greatest aircraft manufacturer in history, whose innovations literally shaped modern civil aviation, end up on the brink of losing its status as a global leader? In this video, we will dissect the anatomy of this fall. We will explore the fatal quality problems, trace the breakdown of the production chain, and uncover why the main killer of Boeing's greatness wasn't Airbus at all, but the corporate financiers of Wall Street. Imagine a world where flying across the ocean isn't a routine trip in a cramped airborne bus, but an exclusive technological marvel. In the mid-20th century, it was the Boeing Corporation that made this marvel an everyday reality. By creating the revolutionary passenger jet 707 and then the monumental double-deck 747 jumbo jet, the company wasn't just mass-producing airplanes, it was, with its own hands, drafting the blueprint for a new era of globalization.
Working at Boeing in those years was as prestigious as designing rockets at SpaceX or creating artificial intelligence in the closed labs of Silicon Valley today. It was an elite club of enthusiasts obsessed with aerodynamics and safety. Do you know what their main insurmountable secret was? Absolute power within the company belonged to the engineers. If creating the perfect fuselage meant writing off hundreds of millions of dollars in losses and delaying a launch by a year, the designers would unhesitatingly go to the director, and the director would approve the move. Quality wasn't just a marketing slogan, it was the corporation's religion. To develop the 747, Boeing took on such colossal debt that the slightest mistake during testing would have meant instant bankruptcy. But the engineers' insane risk paid off handsomely. But ask yourself this: how long can a business founded on the pure perfectionism of its creators survive in an era of ruthless global capitalism? For decades, Americans held virtually unchallenged dominion over the skies. However, a Europe weary of watching the technological hegemony of the United States decided to strike back. Fragmented European aircraft manufacturers consolidated into a single steel fist, generously fueled by government subsidies, and thus the ambitious consortium Airbus was born. The greatest industrial duopoly of the modern era had begun. Picture an endless game of high-stakes poker with hundreds of billions of dollars, millions of jobs, and the prestige of entire continents on the line. Every time Boeing brought a new machine to market, Airbus would immediately match that card with its own cutting-edge development, and vice versa. The stakes in this war of attrition escalated with each passing decade. To withstand the onslaught of its audacious European rival, the American giant needed to adapt, become more agile, more cunning, and, most crucially, more financially efficient. And this is precisely where our investigation begins.
Most people are accustomed to thinking that Boeing's modern problems are the result of random technical malfunctions or isolated defective parts. But what if I told you the truth? What if the lethal virus that destroyed the world's greatest engineering culture had infiltrated the corporation's bloodstream long before the first passenger jets fell from the sky? In 1997, a colossal merger took place, unanimously hailed by the press as an absolute triumph for Boeing. No one suspected then that this was the very moment the company voluntarily signed its own death warrant. What was this deal, and how did it trigger the hidden machinery of corporate self-destruction? Let's figure it out. Imagine you're sitting in an airplane seat at 5,000 meters, calmly sipping your morning coffee, when suddenly, with a deafening roar, a section of the fuselage right next to you simply vanishes, leaving a gaping hole open to the night sky. Sounds like an exaggerated scene from a Hollywood disaster movie, doesn't it? But for the passengers of the Alaska Airlines flight in January 2024, this nightmare became absolute reality. A door plug tore off a brand new Boeing 737 MAX 9 mid-flight. How is such a thing even possible in our high-tech 21st century? It turned out that on the factory floor, assemblers had simply forgotten to tighten 4 retaining bolts, just 4 bolts that stood between dozens of people and certain death. To understand the scale of this crisis, we need to step back a little. Ask yourself, what is the single most important part of commercial aviation? Comfortable seats? Fuel efficiency? No. The only currency that truly matters when you put 200 people in an aluminum tube and send them into the stratosphere is absolute trust in safety. And that is the currency Boeing managed to burn to the ground. The catalyst for the disaster was the infamous MCAS system. Let me explain it as simply as possible. Imagine you're driving down a highway and an invisible ghost autopilot suddenly decides you're doing it wrong and cranks the steering wheel hard toward a ditch. You fight to straighten it out, but the computer is stronger. That is precisely what the pilots of the 737 MAX faced. MCAS was a cheap software patch created to compensate for the aircraft's balance flaws caused by installing new, larger engines. But the creepiest part of this story? Boeing simply hid the very existence of this program from pilots and regulators to save millions on their simulator retraining. The result of this monstrous cost-cutting was 2 crashes in 2018 and 2019 and 346 lives lost. The stakes skyrocketed. During the investigation, internal emails from engineers surfaced where they themselves called the plane designed by clowns who in turn are supervised by monkeys. You would think that after grounding the entire fleet, the company would scrutinize every millimeter of their aircraft. But did Boeing learn its lesson? The answer lies on the factory floors. Soon, FAA inspectors began finding alarming things inside the flagship 787 Dreamliner, forgotten debris inside finished planes, empty bottles, discarded tools, and fuselage sections that literally didn't fit together. The pressure from management was so intense that the motto became, "Just get that plane delivered faster." From a guarantor of safety, Boeing turned into a brand that passengers began to openly fear, deliberately setting filters in apps to only fly on Airbus. But why did legendary engineers suddenly start turning a blind eye to obvious defects? To find the answer, we have to look at the technological race they lost to the Europeans. And what we see there will completely flip your understanding of the situation. In the world of aviation, there exists an invisible holy grail, the middle of the market. Airlines around the globe dream of narrow-body aircraft with long-range capabilities. Why? Let me explain it simply. Such an airliner is cheap to operate, easy to fill to capacity with passengers, guaranteeing profit on every flight, and capable of crossing the Atlantic Ocean without refueling. The Europeans at Airbus were the first to tap into this goldmine. They released the super-successful A321neo and then delivered a knockout punch by announcing a long-range version, the A321XLR. It was absolute checkmate. Airbus effortlessly claimed the most lucrative and promising segment of the global market. How was the American technological giant supposed to respond? Logically, by locking its best engineers in labs, allocating $15 billion, and building a fundamentally new, revolutionary aircraft from scratch. But development would take about a decade. Could you explain to investors, hungry for quick dividends, why they should endure losses for an entire decade? That's when Boeing's top managers made a fatal decision. Instead of innovation and clean sheet designs, they decided to simply pump steroids into the old 737, whose basic airframe was designed, get this, in 1967. It's like trying to cram the giant, powerful engine of a modern Formula One car under the hood of your grandfather's sedan. You can't fool physics. The new fuel-efficient engines were too big. They simply wouldn't fit under the low wings of the classic 737. To fit the unfittable, engineers had to move the engines forward and raise them up. This mangled the aircraft's aerodynamics. Now, during takeoff, the plane's nose would dangerously pitch up on its own. And it was precisely to mask this design crutch, just to avoid designing a new airframe, that programmers hastily wrote the now infamous, deadly MCAS system. This innovation dead end quite literally led to disasters. Do you think the problem only affected small planes? The stakes continue to rise. Even in the market where Boeing historically held unchallenged dominance, the segment of long-haul, wide-bodied giants, a colossal failure is brewing. Their new flagship, the Boeing 777X, with its folding wingtips, has turned into an endless technological nightmare. Due to systemic quality issues and failed tests, the certification of this aircraft has been delayed by more than 5 years. Airlines are burning billions of dollars while they wait, and their trust in American timelines is evaporating before our eyes. Boeing has forgotten how to create new airplanes. But how did the corporation that designed the legendary 747 in just 28 months during the 1960s end up in such a dead end? Perhaps the answer lies in the fact that there's simply nothing left to build innovation from. What the management of Boeing voluntarily did to its own supply chain would shock even the most stoic economists. Ready to take a look behind the scenes of the ghost factories? Imagine you've decided to build the house of your dreams, but instead of hiring one trusted construction crew and personally overseeing the pouring of the foundation and the erection of the walls, you distribute the tasks to 50 random contractors all over the world. One makes the roof in China, another pours concrete in Mexico, and a third assembles the windows in India. And you just sit back in your chair, expecting that in the end they'll bring these pieces to your lot and the house will somehow miraculously assemble itself without a single gap. Sounds like a recipe for disaster, wouldn't you agree?
Now imagine this isn't a country house. It's a passenger airliner flying at an altitude of 10,000 meters at a speed of 900 kilometers per hour. Historically, Boeing made almost everything itself. The corporation's factories were giant, self-contained ecosystems where engineers could literally walk down from their office floor to the workshop and personally inspect the quality of the metal or the riveting. But in the early 2000s, management decided that building planes entirely in-house was too complex and too expensive. Chasing impressive figures in quarterly reports, they implemented a destructive philosophy of blind outsourcing. Why keep thousands of workers on the payroll, paying their pensions and insurance, when you can simply buy ready-made sections of the aircraft from outside contractors, like pieces of a Lego set? The stakes began to skyrocket when Boeing did the unthinkable. It voluntarily sold off its own heart.
In 2005, the company divested itself of the massive Wichita, Kansas plant that had been building fuselages for the legendary 737 for decades. The plant was spun off into an independent company called Spirit AeroSystems. Ask yourself, what happens when your main supplier of critical components becomes an independent business? That's right, they start cutting costs ruthlessly to show profits to their own shareholders. Boeing relentlessly squeezed Spirit, demanding lower prices and faster production. In response, the contractor hired less qualified workers, pushed the assembly line to its limit, and turned a blind eye to minor defects. Remember that door plug that blew off on the Alaska Airlines flight we mentioned at the beginning? Guess where that faulty fuselage was assembled? Yes, at the Spirit AeroSystems plant. Due to the fragmented supply chain, Boeing ultimately lost control over how and from what its planes are made. Inspectors at the final assembly line in Seattle simply couldn't physically keep up with checking the thousands of parts arriving from around the world with defects. When production turns into a chaotic mosaic where no one is responsible for the final result, a disaster becomes just a matter of time.
The system collapsed. Instead of brilliant cost saving, the corporation got a logistical nightmare, billion-dollar losses, and an inability to deliver planes quickly. Airbus happily scooped up the market share Boeing was leaving behind. But wait, how did brilliant aircraft designers even come up with the crazy idea of chopping up their own production empire? The answer will shock you. The truth is, the engineers didn't make that decision. By that point, completely different people had seized power within the company, and what they did to Boeing can be described as the perfect corporate murder. Ready to learn the names of the real villains in this story? So far, we've talked about technical failures, a lack of innovation, and chaos on the factory floors. It's logical to assume that the fall of this great giant was solely the fault of its ambitious competitor, Airbus. But what if I told you a shocking truth? Boeing didn't lose this war to Europe. The main killer of the corporation wasn't defects in the metal or European subsidies. The great Boeing was killed by people in expensive suits from Wall Street, its own top managers. To find the true scene of the crime, we need to rewind time back to 1997. That was the year of the historic merger between Boeing and its struggling competitor, McDonnell Douglas. The press celebrated a giant had swallowed an underdog, but behind closed doors, something entirely different was taking place. Imagine a healthy, strong person swallowing a dangerous parasite, and that parasite suddenly taking full control of its host's brain. Experts would later describe this deal with a phenomenal phrase: McDonnell Douglas bought Boeing with Boeing's own money. The managers of the defeated company mysteriously took over all the key leadership positions in the merged corporation. Ask yourself this: what happens if you put not brilliant surgeons, but stockbrokers in charge of a high-tech hospital? In 1997, Boeing's DNA mutated forever. The fanatical engineers who had spent decades sleeping in factories to ensure flight safety were ruthlessly stripped of real power. They were replaced by cold financiers. These new leaders knew nothing about material stress tolerance or aerodynamics. Their language was dividends, profit margin charts, and a manic obsession with cost-cutting. Airplanes were no longer the main goal. They became just another financial tool to enrich shareholders. But how exactly did these efficient managers manage to legally destroy a reputation that had been painstakingly built over a century?
And what terrible things did they force ordinary employees to do? Let's descend into the darkest basements of Boeing's corporate culture and dissect the anatomy of this systemic rot. Imagine the captain of a giant ocean liner who, in the midst of a brutal storm, abandons the bridge to lock himself in the vault and count his gold coins. It sounds like madness, doesn't it? But that's precisely what Boeing's top management did, voluntarily blinding themselves at the most critical moment. In 2001, the corporation took a symbolic and utterly fatal step. It moved its headquarters from Seattle, the historic home of its factories and the heart of its engineering mind, to Chicago and eventually to Arlington. Why? To distance itself, literally and metaphorically, from the noise of the shop floor and those pesky engineers who were always demanding more time and money for testing. The new leaders wanted to sit in quiet offices, closer to politicians and the financial flows of Wall Street.
Safely ensconced in sterile offices thousands of miles from the smell of jet fuel, the managers became obsessed with a new game. Its name is share buybacks. Let me explain this as simply as possible. You own a bakery, and instead of buying new ovens or improving your bread recipe, you take all your revenue and buy out your business partner's shares. The bakery doesn't improve, the equipment rusts, the bread goes stale, but your personal slice of the pie is suddenly worth twice as much on paper. Do you know how much Boeing spent on this financial alchemy? Between 2010 and 2019, the company burned an astronomical $68 billion on buying back its own stock. Just let that number sink in. For that amount of money, they could have designed 3 completely new, revolutionary and safe aircraft from scratch, forever crushing Airbus. But no, those billions simply settled into the pockets of shareholders and top executives, whose multi-million-dollar bonuses were directly tied to the company's stock price. But the stakes kept rising because someone had to pay for these financial manipulations, and that someone turned out to be quality. When profit becomes the only religion, safety turns into an annoying line item on an expense report. Management implemented manic efficiency metrics and ruthless cost-cutting. If a worker on the assembly line spotted a defect and stopped production, they were no longer praised as a hero, they were punished for falling behind schedule. Experienced veteran engineers who tried to raise the alarm and wrote memos about frightening violations were harassed. They were intimidated, marginalized, or simply fired. Stop slowing down production. Just sign the paperwork. That became the unofficial motto at the corporation's factories. Beautiful Excel spreadsheets had finally replaced the real engineering process. Management saw only the green numbers of profit, willfully blind to how the very structure of their business was systemically rotting.
But you can't deceive the laws of physics and aerodynamics with a pretty quarterly report. In a high-tech industry where human lives are at stake, financial engineering always ends in tragedy. When the plane started falling and the illusion of perfection crumbled, a terrifying truth was revealed to the world. What chilling yet sobering conclusion must not only the aviation industry, but the entire modern business world draw from looking at the smoldering ruins of Boeing's reputation? Have you ever wondered how long it takes to destroy a century-old legacy of excellence? The answer is brutally cruel. Exactly 1 decade of absolute power in the hands of financiers. The main lesson that the entire global business must learn from the collapse of Boeing reads like a death sentence for the era of corporate capitalism. Financial engineering can never replace the real thing. Let's think about it simply. If you release a buggy mobile app or a video game full of glitches, you can release a patch or an update the next day. No one dies from a frozen smartphone.
But when you build giant aluminum tubes flying at near-sonic speeds in the stratosphere, Silicon Valley's mantra of move fast and break things turns into a weapon of mass destruction. There are no beta versions in aviation. You can't fool gravity with a beautiful PowerPoint presentation, and aerodynamics doesn't obey formulas from Excel spreadsheets. The tragedy of Boeing is not just a story about bad airplanes. It is a deep philosophical diagnosis of the entire modern economy. We witnessed an entire industry try to manage a physical, deadly reality using virtual financial metrics. Efficient managers, disconnected from the product, who had never held a wrench in their hands, decided they were smarter than the laws of physics. And the stakes in this game were cruelly paid for with human lives. They thought they were saving a few measly cents on assembly speed, but in the end, they burned billions of dollars in market capitalization and America's greatest technological brand. A reputation built with the blood, sweat, and tears of brilliant engineers for a century crumbled to dust under the weight of corporate greed. But does this diagnosis mean the final death of the Titan? Will the corporation be able to banish the accountants from its drafting offices and once again become the Boeing to which we entrusted our lives? The answer lies hidden in the future, and what awaits global aviation tomorrow looks no less frightening. What awaits the fallen Titan tomorrow? Will it be able to rise from its knees, or will it finally cede its heavenly throne? Restoring a destroyed engineering culture is not just like changing the oil in an engine. It's like teaching a person to walk again after years in a coma. Boeing has already taken its first desperate steps toward redemption. The company changed its leadership, removing the financiers, and launched the painful, astronomically expensive process of buying back the Spirit Aerosystems plant. They are desperately trying to piece together the broken production chain and return power to the technicians. But is it too little, too late? As Americans scramble to put out the fire in their own house, the stakes on the global stage have never been higher. Airbus is no longer just a competitor. It is rapidly transforming into an absolute global monopolist, snatching up the most lucrative contracts. However, America's real nightmare lies somewhere else entirely. Look to the east. While the Western duopoly carves up the market, a third predator has silently emerged on the horizon. The Chinese corporation Comac is already operating its passenger airliner, the C919, on a large scale. Today, Western experts chuckle condescendingly at it. But ask yourself this: didn't we laugh the same way at Chinese cars just 15 years ago, right before they took over the global market? So, can the quintessential American dream be saved from total collapse? Or are you and I witnessing, right here in real time, the final days of the greatest aircraft manufacturing empire in human history? Boeing is losing this war not because its engineers suddenly forgot how to make precise blueprints. It is losing because the corporation voluntarily sold its soul for pretty numbers on financial reports. To survive and attempt to reclaim its crown, the company will have to undergo a hellish, incredibly painful restructuring. Management needs to break the vicious cycle of greed, forget about shareholder dividends for years, and relearn how to do what they once did better than anyone else in the world: build great airplanes safely. Otherwise, the legendary phrase, "If it ain't Boeing, I ain't going," will forever transform from a mark of quality into a terrifying warning. What do you think? Can the American giant win back our trust, or does the future of global aviation already irrevocably belong to Airbus and its daring Chinese competitors? Be sure to share your opinion in the comments. I will discuss the most interesting thoughts in future videos. If you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss new investigations. And right now, other exciting videos about the biggest secrets and disasters in global aviation are appearing on your screen. Click on any one of them and continue your deep dive into the world of aviation. Safe flights, and see you soon.